Good afternoon, everyone. Hello, we welcome you all here. Come on in. My name is Caroline. I'm a current SSA student, and I am extremely honored to introduce our three speakers and lecturers today. And I have a feeling from what I've heard that it is not often that the three of you are in the same place at the same time. So I think that we're very lucky to have these three women here to speak with us today. Right on my left is Professor Maria de los Angeles Torres, and she is the Director and Professor of Latin American and Latino Studies at the University of Illinois in Chicago. And her areas of specialization include, I'm sure among many others, comparative politics of U.S. Latinos, U.S. Latin American relations, Cuba and its exiles, transnational political movements, youth politics in the Americas, and Latin American political thought. She's currently working on two research projects, Children and Youth Politics in the Age of Globalization, funded by Chapman Hall and the Kellogg Foundation, and Comparative Civic Engagement in Three Latino Communities, COPI for a National Science Research Foundation project. And next is Professor Norma Alicia Del Rio Lugo, and she's a full-time researcher, professor, titular C of Psychology at the Department of Education and Communication of the Metropolitan Autonomous University Xochimilco in Mexico City. And she's the head of the research program on infancy and childhood and of the Center of Documentation on Infancy. Her current projects include a dizionario, a tool to promote the discovery of new possible worlds in collaboration with the Director of Indigenous Education of the state of Michoacan and the Institute of Computational Linguistics. And what we're here to talk about today, the Youth Civic Engagement, three-city study of Chicago, Mexico City, and Rio de Janeiro. And then last but not least is Professor Rizzini, who spoke with us this morning and really, I think, started our day off on a really great note, and very grateful that you're all here.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think I've been designated to start. First of all, I want to thank you and thank the students really for organizing this conference. It's great to be able to share with you experiences that are starting to bear fruit here, because I think international perspectives are still hard to grasp, in part because that's not the way we really organize our lives on a day-to-day basis, and it's usually not the way that scholarship is organized, and it's hard to put together comparative studies that really get to some of the questions that we're interested in. What I wanted to do was maybe give a little background to the project, because I really see this as a workshop. We're not as organized as Malcolm was in terms of our data. It is an ongoing project, so to share with you our experiences in putting together an international project, maybe spend a little time with the theoretical and linguistic challenges that we are grappling with, and talk a little bit about the research methodology itself and where we're at, and then turn it over to my colleagues. Obviously, at any point in time, if I say something that's like, if I'm forgetting something, okay, or if you want to add something, please jump in. This project, in part, started out of, I'm a political scientist, so I'm really in a whole different area, but started as a question for me that came from a previous project that I had done on Cuban refugee children, minors at the time, called at the time. In the 1960s, it came over to the United States. There was 14,000 unaccompanied children. And I really was left thinking about that in terms of what had happened to children in the context of modernism and nation building. And given that that was 40 years ago, I then asked the question, well, if modernism had constructed children in a certain way that led to certain policies, we're no longer in that epoch. But what is it that children and young people say about their world, all right, instead of trying to theorize? What is it about their world? And I was lucky enough to have Pastora Cafferty San Juan as somebody who's always been very close, who introduced me to Harold, who then introduced me to Irene and to Mark Courtney, who asked me to spend a year at Chapin, really being able to retool, since political socialization was not something that I had really done anything with since graduate school. And so here we are, thanks to Pastora and the Herald. I think the intention was to then look at engaged youth, and that is, I have lots of colleagues who study political participation, and what we know about young people really from across the world is that young people are very much like adults, that they don't participate politically a lot, particularly in more democratic systems, and that there has been in fact a decline in adult participation, and so therefore there's a crisis in democracy. And so we're trying to think, okay, well, what's the next generation like? Are they doing something? So we know a lot, I think, well, a lot. We know more about the unengaged and apolitical youth than we know of those who are engaged. And so we started really thinking through what it meant to be engaged and to really define, in a certain sense, and find young people who were out there making a difference in the world outside their own private lives. And there weren't that many of them, but we thought it was very important for us to understand how it is that they had gotten there. And I started the Chicago project while I was at Chapin a couple of years ago, and basically worked with various community organizations that are involved in youth empowerment projects to help get them to help me identify who were really the most articulate, the most engaged, very consciously selecting a very, very biased sample, because those are the young people that we were interested in talking to. We ended up with 25 youth, and then that ended up, after I taught a class on youth and nation building, to 40. But the main sample that we're working with on a comparative basis were 25 in-depth interviews in different community organizations. And, you know, I've done some preliminary analysis that will then help us sort of do some comparative with this, but there were a couple of really interesting things that came out of the Chicago project, and I just want to share that before we get to some of the theoretical challenges. But there, many of these youth actually, I think only 2 of them have families that are also involved in some kind of politics, whether it's precinct work, and one Puerto Rican young woman, and fundraising for one African American young woman. But what they all shared was someone in their family that had respected them as a kid when they were little and allowed them to speak their mind and listen to them at home. Not necessarily that parents encouraged kids to be involved in politics. In fact, particularly in the case of immigrant kids, parents discouraged that because they didn't want the light or the attention on their families. But even those youths felt that their role in the family was one that they brokered an outside world for their parents, and as such, they were respected in that family. So that's a very, kind of interesting. I mean, I wasn't expecting to find that. The identity politics still is very in a defining set of forces for young people in Chicago. That is, race, gender, ethnicity matter in the ways that young people identify themselves, even as they are also identifying as a member of a youth group. That is, so they'll be involved in and very conscious that they're youth, but all these other intervening factors are also part of how they organize themselves. There's a quest for equality. I mean, most of the kids came from community organizations, which meant that they were neighborhood-based organizations. There's what, in a sense, the projects that they're involved with and the projects that they see themselves being involved with in the future really have to do with a quest for equality. That is a better distribution of educational services, better services for their own communities and for their families, that they are very conscious that they don't receive the same kind of education as kids in other parts of the city or in the suburbs. All right, their sense of rights are embedded in the American political experience. Their individual rights, the right to speak, the right to walk out in the street without being told that they can't. It's a very individually based set of rights. But they also feel, many of them, that they are responsible for representing another image of what it is to be youth, because they're also conscious that youth are targeted as negatively through popular culture. So they feel a sense of responsibility to also create another image. There's a lot of discussion in the literature about global and local and how globalization was going to bring us together and let us do things together. At least this set of young people are very much rooted in local politics. They are conscious of the fact that they live in the most powerful country in the world. They would like for that country to be a little kinder to other countries. Many of them are against the war, but their day-to-day politics really unfold in their neighborhoods and in their schools. So again, there may be class differences here, to where those who go to better schools and have more resources in their families don't have to fight for basic educational rights, but in this set of young people, that becomes very important. And that's a little bit sort of, about 2 years worth of work in, 5 minutes here. And during this time, I had really, started to think about Chicago as a global city and what it meant to be part of, connected to the world, and what it meant to have many worlds within one city. And because of Chapin's international network, we started really thinking of doing this internationally. And we were lucky enough to receive funding from the Kellogg Foundation to let us do this study in Mexico City and in Rio. And the first challenges, I think, that we faced, besides the fact that it's hard to get from place to place, and funding for international work it's a lot harder to get than it is for doing other kinds of research, were theoretical and linguistic challenges, all right? I think theoretically I was coming at this really thinking about modernism and postmodernity, and children's place in modernism in terms of nation building and the promise of the future, and what happens when national projects fail, in a certain sense, to really deliver on the promise on, as we sit here in this campus, the John Dewey promise that in order to have good, solid, healthy democracies, we needed to have a strong educational system, because you can't be uninformed and really participate and engage politically. So I was thinking, modernism, post-modernity, the failures of national projects, this idea of children as the future versus the present. All right, again, there's a temporality, I think, to these various eras that may be distinct, which then changes our understanding of the place of children and our commitment towards children. And we just sort of spent 2 hours, I think, yesterday, trashing modernity as a hopelessly kind of a concept, historical concept that is embedded with a lot of history and assumptions about what it means and this kind of thing. Although we're trying to see what are the threads that maybe are present in these various countries, which at the end were countries that were part of an American project, right? It is they're born of indigenous and African and European cultures, but they were sort of experimental in the sense of the world stage. So we're trying to find threads of commonality with the understanding that these concepts are mined with a lot of assumptions that we need to be careful when we apply them. The other sort of huge one is democracy, all right? Again, the assumption here that you need to have informed citizens. I think we would all, we would agree that that is something that ties us together. But what exactly is democracy, and what were the various forms of conceptions of democracies that may have emerged in our particular countries, and what's different about them, not just structurally but conceptually. And so we have to, when we're thinking of political participation, that's one of the, again, issues that we need to be very careful in how we understand the differences in our commonalities. The other one is globalization, and globalization is huge, all right? I mean, sometimes when people say, well, do you believe or not in globalization? I mean, I think globalization is. I mean, there is, there's lots of ways of defining it. We can think of, all the promises that globalization gave us. In fact, part of the reason that we're all around here talking about this is because there is an awareness that we live in a much more interconnected world. On the other hand, globalization has brought incredible inequality in terms of those who have and those who have not. It's brought bifurcated economies in ways that we maybe have never seen before. It's brought, social formations of cities as opposed to nation states. And nation states maybe don't matter to some of us unless you're trying to cross a border coming in. And so it's a complex period where, politics maybe doesn't mean, or participation may not mean as much as it did when there was the possibility of, broader middle classes. And there's been, the economic changes in terms of opportunities and the social changes, because there has been, I think, in this epoch of, globalization / postmodernity, neo-colonial, whatever words at the end we decide, there's been an abandonment of commitments to really taking care of and educating societies. There's also the question of place. Again, where do people live, and how do they, how do their day-to-day lives come in? I've become a little bit more conscious of that because I'm working with geographers in another project. And, just when we think of this city, for instance, the neighborhoods, how clearly defined they are along racial and ethnic lines, and what that means, and how people then define their politics within that, and how young people engage with that is very particular. And those are things that we're going to have to really try to understand in each of the cities. And the two others that I think are the, kind of the theoretical here and the linguistic challenges that we have is participation. I think there has been a lot of work in the United States, this idea that it's not just voting, but rather engagement in public events. We struggle with defining what we mean with that. I mean, in the sense, is it, if doing community service to pad your resume, is that the same thing as going out and, getting people to sign petitions to support more resources for school because it needs better college counselors, all right? So trying to make distinctions between kinds of public activities and how youth themselves are defining that. Again, because image is so important to many of the youth here in Chicago, and we have found in a little bit in other cities, and Norma, maybe, when you talk about this, you could really talk about media work. Art and media work becomes very important, and I kind of say, well, this is the postmodern, right, kind of preoccupation with image, but it's still the old-fashioned, I'm being discriminated because I'm an African-American youth or I'm a Latino youth, and therefore I have to change this image, that you really have two sets of concerns colliding in a certain sense to create challenges, political challenges for these young people, that things like video production do become very important, at the same time that they also understand that are just old-fashioned protests, down at the Board of Education. The last one that we're really, really grappling with is, what is a youth, all right? I mean, here we are, we're doing comparative engagement. And by the way, engagement, we know when we talked about participation, we know what engagement means, but I think Irene sent out a description of the project to England, and somebody said they wanted to know we were like studying, kids who were about to be married, get married. That's also, and is it leadership versus protagonism versus agency? But youth is a really hard category to pin down, all right? We're trying to figure out how and when and if youth is a socially constructed category that's meaningful in the cities that we are working with. And we may, at the end, decide that it's not quite the same way in each one of our areas. I suspect youth is a consumer category. I suspect it is also a category to be consumed, particularly in a hypersexualized, imagery of young people that we see every day, in advertisement. But it's also in part because of this, and maybe because there are all sorts of the kinds of old commitments that we had as societies towards education and towards children, which have never, by the way, been distributed equally. Our concerns have also had all sorts of, class and racial divides in terms of our concerns and our delivery of that. That it also creates a site for potential contestation, either of that construction or of it potentially becoming a vehicle for empowerment, And how that occurs will probably be very different. But instead of us theorizing what it means to be young, what it means to be political, what it means to be global and all that, we decided to set up a research project that basically relied on the narratives of young activists. All right, so we are bringing our bias into this, saying we are interested in young activists, and we do have some understanding across the three cities of what that activism may mean. So we're listening. Okay, that is just the first step. Age is something we had originally talked about. Maybe I had wanted to start real early. My colleagues at Chapin really dissuaded me from that, thinking developmentally adolescence was a stage that had all sorts of characteristics. And so my sample really runs from 11 to 19. And but as we found out yesterday, age is really we would never call a 29-year-old a young person here, right? That's a young adult. Whereas in Brazil, that is a youth, all right? And in Mexico, it may be another age. So we've had to have more in Mexico, yeah. 29, yeah. 29, but 26, yeah.
A young activist could be 26.
Yeah. So
Youth 24.
Yeah. 18 sort of our top here, okay? So again, this changed a little bit, the parameters that we had really put together, and again, then we started thinking about, okay, in terms of age, is it, and Irene, this is something I really want you to talk about because I think you're very, the way that you said it, at least yesterday, was very convincing. But, you have a lot of young people who, even after they go to school, there's no jobs. So you really do have this extension. You become responsible when you have a family, right, or when you have a job. Well, especially if you have a job, because then you're a provider. But if you don't have a job, you can't really be a responsible adult. So some of the reasons that category has maybe expanded in other countries is precisely because of the lack of economic opportunities in order to be responsible, all right? Whereas here, we may have, there's lots of people saying youth is sort of invading the space of the 20s, because baby boomers, don't want to grow up. And so therefore, baby boomers now want to dress like, our teenage daughters or whatever, and so there's different dynamics at work here in terms of age that we have to grapple with in order to kind of do, some minimal comparison. activist or something, again, that I think we did define, that is letting us talk to different people, although again, activism and how active the person needs to be may be different from site to site. And lastly, we did start with a common protocol of some basic kinds of questions. I mean, just backgrounds, letting people tell their narratives, certain questions about how they got involved, what it meant to be involved, how they defined some of these broader issues, how they defined themselves. So there is a common protocol that obviously, even when I was using the protocol here with 25 youth, changes, because as you know, when you're doing qualitative interviews, you're not going to tell somebody who's telling you this incredible story, well, you know, okay, now we got to go on to the next question. You know, so there is a fuzziness about the the protocol that we are assuming as really part of something that's going to allow us maybe to have a richer discussion. We are, and I'm going to end with this and turn this over, but we did succeed in, again, our 2 days of meetings, and we're just coming off of that. I mean, I think you said we left our brains on the table. That's what Malcolm told me you had said, but we're trying to pick them back up. We did actually end up having a discussion about how we thought we could present some of this data, and Norma and Irene are still in the middle of their interviews, okay, so they're not done yet, but questions that will let us code some of these narratives in similar ways. And so for now, we're working with 3 sort of very broad categories that I bet will change in the next 6 months. But for now, we're thinking about all the things that allows a youth to become, in a certain sense, political. All right, that is the process of becoming. Secondly, engaging, all the various forms of engagements, the projects of engagement, the kinds of engagement, that kind of stuff. And thirdly, sort of their envisioning, that is, why are they doing this? Okay, what are the underlying ideals that are framing for these young people, their political actions, however those may be defined. And again, I am a political scientist, but I define politics very broadly. So we left ourselves the task for the next time that we meet is to really start thinking about about youth, right? Youth and what that means in each one of our cities. Maybe something like youth in the public imagination. And secondly, the part of participation in politics and perhaps place, youth in public places, all right, which could lead us also to some of the difficulties around notions of globalization and modernity and temporality. So I think that was my version of what we just did. And I'm listening.
I went, recognize it.
Very, very good. We were very tired. It was intense.
So, Norma?
Well, I work at a public university in Mexico City. And we have been working now for 6 years in a research program. It's an interdisciplinary program between the 3 campuses of professors and researchers that have been working in different areas related to childhood. And so we have formed different lines of different lines of research, but the 3 lines of research have in common the Convention of the Rights of the Children. I mean, it's been one of our main goals in this research program is to do research in a networking form of work. And we have set up all the local networks that we have been working with civil organizations and government organizations in order to be able to work in another way, so that the academic work may not be done from an office, but right in the fields. And so we are now part of this Child Watch international network, and trying to get these lines of research that we have been working on a regional basis. And this is our first collaborative research in this sense. And as Nena said, we have some challenges here. One of them is the three different languages. The other one is this preoccupation of making research with a child participation focus, in which we are, instead of theorizing, we are just wanted to listen to the voices and make them write their own version of who they are, why are they participating, and providing a space for reflection and meeting and encounters between the different youths in a city that is it's a very complex space, so that they may be able to interchange and meet each other in this sense. We want to also, in a later phase, to be able to interchange with the Chicago boys and girls and the Rio de Janeiro, maybe in reading their texts in their own language, or interchanging some of the views and through the use of the media. This project not only has some products that are very definite, but we are also interested in the process of this kind of participation of these children, and we are trying also to create new networks with adolescents in another sense, like Nena said, with this global and local paradigm of modernity. I want to give you some very brief data about Mexico. I think you are very familiar with some of our main issues. Migration is one of our main preoccupations as a country. We are now 110 million people in Mexico as a country, and we have about 50% of our people are living under conditions of poverty, although the levels, official ciphers of poverty are less if they are defined by $1 or $2 income a month. We have a Gini index coefficient of unequal distribution of about 0.58. That's one of the most unequal, like Brazil. We, in this sense, we share many of the social economic situations and conditions of inequality that just characterize, and I think it's part of this globalization tendency that in this world we are living in. Mexico City has about 12 million people if we are considering also the metropolitan area. And as a city, it's you could say that it's a privileged city in the sense that it has many access and services and educational options for children and youth that you wouldn't find in other parts of the country. There's, in this sense, you could say that the Mexico City is not very typical of representation of what is Mexico, because I think one of the characteristics that Mexico has is this very diverse and multicultural panorama of cultures, languages, and people that just have been recognized as such, as Mexico as a nation. And it has been a recent movement that in part was because of the Zapatista revolt that made all this social pressure about the need for not a monolithic politics, but diverse and more inclusive kind of policies that are just beginning to take in the form of some changes and reforms in the laws, but from the laws to making a real policy, there is just a great gap. In about relative to education, we have most universal access to primary to the first 6 grades. Almost we have gotten almost all the children in schools, but the quality of education is very questionable. The recent results on literacy skills in 6th grade and in junior high school are very discouraging about the role that the school is making in really giving skills to our young children. It's we have these indices on literacy skills where the private schools just have like a 4% of children that do not meet the required basic skills for writing and reading comprehension, while public schools are 1/5, and indigenous schools are almost a half of the children that do not meet the basic skills. And I mean to be able to write in a short sentence a coherent story or narrative or such things. So I think that this kind of research, where we just not only interview our young people and have data to compare, but to be able to give them a chance to write their own stories and leave the testimony. It's a very important milestone. I don't know how to put it in that way. In this sense of making them have spaces where they have not been allowed to be heard and read. Another thing that I was thinking about these differences and these contrasts on do they become social and active participants in society is the role of family, in the sense that I think in a great a number of families, family is a very strong tradition in Mexico, and I think the process of identity formation, it's just an inverse kind of thing. You go from a communal sense, you are part of the community, and then you get to grow on as an individual. It's just like an inverse kind of thing. So you go from the we to the I, and then you go back as part of the community, but in another sense. I don't know if I'm making it clear.
Right.
So it's going to be, I think it's going to be a very interesting thing on how this question of becoming is going to be answered in when you take these different kind of cultural forms of socialization. I don't know if I think these are the most important things that I wanted to share. But if you later want to ask, I would be glad to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just compliment. It's a workshop, and we are just starting in some ways, and it's a new process for us, a new experiment. And of course, you must have more questions then. It's not easy to understand all these in such a small period of time. But I would complement with two things. A little bit about the kids we are looking at. And some would not be called kids, I think. Even in Brazil, maybe not in Mexico. These are young youth, juventude. In juventude, we have been struggling, the three of us, but also many of us back in my own center, have been struggling with the changing concept of what it is to be a child, what it is to be an adolescent. And youth is almost like, it's not a new category, but it's newly very visible. There are several reasons for this to be happening, and one is the demographic aspect of it. We have, for the first time in history, we have a larger percentage of these age, isn't it, Marcia? The age range between 15 and 19. It used to be that we had many more children younger than 15, and that's shifted. It's larger now. Other factors have to do with the changing nature of the welfare system. We had practices of, as I mentioned in the morning, of large institutions. That doesn't exist anymore. We had other ways in which children participated in their communities that is not in place anymore. So you have more children that are visible out of their communities. So the visibility we talk about of the street, the so-called street children after the 80s. It's not only that the phenomenon became more visible, really, really globally. It's everywhere. Even in Norway, they want me to talk about street children in a population of 4 million people, very wealthy per capita. They want to talk about street children, runaways, and all those the homeless young people. But there are also interesting changes in family structures, very rapid changes in family structure that has led to smaller families, but busier adults, children that are growing up on their own, the easy access to the streets and to be outside the home, especially for boys. They're mainly boys, still is around the world. And of course, as Malcolm mentioned earlier, very disconnected to the young population, to a workforce. So no work and difficulties in income generation, and the fact that the schools are very poor. It's true that most of them do get enrolled when they're 7, 8, but they are off school after 3, 4 years. So you have, we were talking about this floating, large group of kids that are floating, trying to survive on a daily basis, and many of them on their own. So we have this, Nena provoked us with the idea of expanding age. So we're talking about the concept of childhood and youth. I'm not sure, and here I'm reflecting with you and provoking you to debate with us, that it has only to do with the fact that there are less resources out there, which is in part true. But you pick a case like Italy, where the birth rate is negative now, so children are not being born, but people are not leaving home too. So, men and women, they are 30, 35, they're still living with their parents and living as if they were married, not necessarily marrying, but being supported by parents. And how will we call them? It's not a fact, like, for example, in Brazil, that they don't have a job, they cannot maintain a family. That doesn't mean that they are not having children, because they are having children and earlier. And the parents have to support raising the children. But it is true that there is an expansion, I think, of that age range there. And as a demographic category, very interestingly, the age range from 15 to 24 became incredibly important in my country. So our IBGE, our Institute for Geography and Statistics, that produced the official data, will have basically all their indicators related as well to this age range, because there is a lot of concern about this population that are not being able to support themselves, get jobs, and eventually support the older generation as well. This brings a lot of challenges for us to, first, I think, just the fact that we are doing research, trying to understand what it is to become a youth, will be already a great thing for us in Brazil. I don't find very, say, convincing pieces of work in anthropology and sociology that are really explaining more clearly all the implications of this visibility to youth at the moment, and definitely what they understand, these people that are young now, how they see themselves in all socioeconomic classes. The young people we are trying to attract, then it's one piece of that. It's those that we could say, and they would recognize themselves as active in society, with a role in society, participating in something that they are doing for others. Okay? Because we could very well defend the argument that young leaders, 18-year-old who is a gang leader, I mean, in the drug trade in Rio, very visible and hated by many, they have to be incredibly good leaders to do what they do and to become alive. We are not going, in this study, we are not denying that that is a role of participation in society, of leadership, protagonism, agency, you name it, all these new terminologies that they are also floating around the world with a lot of confusion. I think confusing the kids as well, the children and the youth as well. But we will be picking those that feel they can do something for other people's lives, to improve other people's lives. So most of them, in the case of Rio, we have 17 interviews so far. These are boys and girls that are doing something related, as Nena said, as a quest for equality, as for respect of rights. Many of them identify themselves with what they are fighting for. For example, young black boys and girls that are fighting for more racial awareness. Some in the hip hop movement, or dance and theater, art education, tools to talk about different aspects of some political issues, more equality. For example, groups talking about HIV/AIDS and gender issues, the importance of protection to prevent diseases, including HIV/AIDS. What else? We have a few from political parties, which is a very new thing. These are youth from different socioeconomic backgrounds, and some that are leaders in churches. We're trying to look at different churches that are active, that young people that are active in their churches, leading some programs for other children and youth or adults. We are interviewing them. So in general, these are this is the profile. We have been discussing then participation. And in some ways, and this is my final point, for us at the center is the first project. It's not the first project that we include young people in our research. We have been working with younger people, including younger people, to, for example, identify community services for children in several low-income communities. So they have been interviewing people with us, different ages, some very successfully, others was really terrible for the research because people didn't feel they wanted to say things to these kids, or the kids felt intimidated to ask certain things. So we went through all these to discuss some ideas related to the need to engage young people in research, and even this idea of children being researchers that really makes me nervous.
Yeah.
But I see that around the world. Yeah. People defending that, and I more than once got accused of not understanding child participation because I said, well, what else do we want them to do? They have to figure out their lives. They have to do all they have to do to be able to compete in the job market today, with more and more difficult. Besides, they have to figure out what will be their future. The street children, they should be able to plan their lives. And so, in some ways, we want to be humble in this case to say, we in universities don't know how to really work together with different people, including young people. And in this case, we designed a methodology that would allow it, and it's not been easy in our case. We have the privilege to, in our university, to work with these, we have a group of 10 that are actively involved, in which they were interviewed, they said they would like to participate. And that means what? That they would have to write a narrative in like 5 pages to present themselves the way they wanted. So that's totally to them. In our group, because we have a conference in April, we are working with them in that they will write their narratives, they will work together to produce a book together the way they wanted, to disseminate it the way they wanted, and in April they would organize with us this conference. Meaning that the way they wanted means that they have to respect that they are in a university and we are doing this together with them leading. And the way we wanted in the conference for, say, an academic event is to talking to them to see how they feel comfortable to be in this conference with us without having to behave like something they are not.
Yeah.
So it's to stop pretending we are all the same, or that we have to prove that we are good in terms of letting them participate. And after all, it becomes a stage where they perform, and young people love to do that.